and I also rise to take note of the government's response to the Senate inquiry. The Iranian-Australian community will be devastated with this response and the refusal of the government to accept the vast majority of the recommendations of the Senate inquiry into the human rights implications of recent violence in Iran. It is staggering that the government would wait 7 months to release this response to a committee inquiry which was undertaken urgently to respond to a crisis situation. And the government has waited until the week of the anniversary of Mahsa Jina Amini's death to refuse to accept these recommendations, which were based on more than 1,000 submissions received and a huge amount of expert evidence. On the 30th of April this year, 3 months after the Senate committee handed down our report, a coalition of Iranian-Australian community groups and a long list of members of the diaspora community wrote to the Prime Minister and to the Foreign Minister. In that letter, they said, "We refer you to 12 actions recommended by the Senate References Committee on Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade in conclusion of its public inquiry in February 2023. These recommendations are informed by over 1,000 submissions from individuals, Australian and international experts, universities and community organisations. Also backing them are nearly 55,000 signatures on our Parliament petition and weeks of continual protests. We, Australians and members of the Iranian-Australian community, stand in full support of the recommendations of the Senate's report and demand nothing short of full and prompt implementation of all 12. We appreciate that officials of your government often highlight the actions taken thus far, but the gap between the current and wanted positions is still deep and wide. Dear Prime Minister," the letter went on, "our sisters and brothers in Iran are keeping the fight up against the evil of the Islamic Republic, and we have sworn to stand by them until the end. Rest assured that we will not tire nor be distracted. Words and excuses do not go a long way when crime against humanity is at stake. Disassociate yourself, your government and our nation from the Islamic Republic corrupt criminals. Stand on the right side of history. Implement the 12 recommendations." This is just one of numerous letters and emails from the Iranian-Australian community urging the government to act on this report and implement the recommendations. And I am absolutely staggered that the government hasn't accepted all of these recommendations. But I'm particularly staggered that they haven't accepted this one, that the committee recommends that any Iranian officials in Australia considered to be involved in intimidation, threats or monitoring of Australians be expelled. How can you not accept that recommendation when the government and the Australian public knows that intimidation and harassment of Australians is occurring and has even been publicly attributed to the Iranian regime? The Home Affairs Minister said that this will not be tolerated. Yet now the government hasn't accepted a recommendation that any Iranian officials involved in harassment or intimidation of Australians be expelled. The government hasn't accepted recommendations to minimise relations with the IRI regime, or even the recommendation to increase transparency and better inform the Australian public about the status of our diplomatic relations with the IRI regime and the security risks it represents relating to cybercrime, hostage diplomacy and threats and intimidation of Australians. Iranian Australians have been so brave, speaking up and urging this parliament and this government to act. They know that they are taking a risk to their personal safety in opposing the IRI regime and turning up to rallies, making submissions and writing letters. And it is devastating that the government's response accepts just 2 of the 12 recommendations in full and 1 in part. As I said yesterday in this place, in the debate on the anniversary of Mahsa Amini's death, this comes at a time when the IRI regime is successfully growing its influence, expanding its state-sponsored terror activities, extracting billions of dollars in ransom, which was released to them today, and continuing to get closer to developing a nuclear bomb. I'm reminded again of the words of the Sydney Peace Prize recipient Nazanin Boniadi, who, in an address to parliamentarians earlier this year, said, "For 44 years, we have tried the same policies and expected a different outcome. That is the definition of insanity." This response looks and feels like a document which the IRI regime can live with.